The year is 1995, the most watched show on Argentine television, Mirtha Legrand's legendary lunch table. Among the guests, a 65-year-old lady with tidy curls and the smile of a kindly aunt, who produces a tray of fine pastries and, in front of the cameras, invites the hostess to try one. The detail: that lady had just walked out of prison, sentenced to life for killing 3 women, poisons, with pastries and tea. Her name was María de las Mercedes Bernardina Boya de Murano. The entire country knew her by another name, Yiya, the poisoner of Montserrat, and that television moment, the pastry killer offering pastries and a whole studio laughing at the joke, may be the single most uncomfortable image in Argentina's criminal history. Not for what it shows about her, for what it shows about everyone else. 3 questions hold this file together. 1. How does a neighborhood lady kill 3 of her friends in 6 weeks without anyone suspecting a thing? 2. How do you walk away from a life sentence for triple murder in little more than a decade? And 3. At what point does a country decide its most famous poisoner is entertainment material and completely forget the 3 dead women? A series about her life just premiered. This is the real story, the one her victims never got to tell. Welcome to Uncut Cases, where we tell Latin America's crimes the way they happen, with sources, with dates, and without softening what's uncomfortable. Today, a case with no blood, no screams, and no weapons. And maybe for that very reason, one of the coldest you'll hear on this channel. Make yourself some tea if you like. Although, after this one, you might think twice. Montserrat is one of the oldest neighborhoods in Buenos Aires. Domes, cafes, buildings that were once elegant, and apartments housing a middle class that aspired to more. In one of those buildings, on a 6th floor on Mexico Street, lived an ordinary couple in the 1970s. Antonio Murano and his wife, María de las Mercedes Bernardina Boya, born in 1930, to the neighborhood simply Yiya. And Yiya was a character. She dressed well, talked better, and cultivated, with a jeweler's dedication, the image of a connected woman. A judge she knew here, a real estate deal there, a financial tip nobody else had. In the Argentina of the 70s, galloping inflation, money melting in the bank, that persona had an irresistible pull. Yiya could make your money work. To understand why they believed her, you need to understand the moment. The Argentina of 1978 and 1979 was living the era history nicknamed Plata Dulce. Sweet money, full military dictatorship, unleashed financial speculation, storefront finance houses sprouting on every corner, promising magical returns, and a middle class convinced that idle money was lost money. In that climate, everyone knew somebody who moved money. A charming neighbor with connections and promises of high interest wasn't an eccentricity. She was the spirit of the age living room edition. Yiya didn't invent her era's greed. She harvested it. The scheme was as old as the world. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances handed over their savings. She promised interest no bank could pay, and for a while, she paid it punctually, with the next investor's money. A living room Ponzi scheme, held together with tea, pastries, and refined conversation. The perfect victims: older women, widowed or alone, with modest savings and absolute trust in that most charming friend. And not the sociological detail, because it explains everyone's blindness. in that world of church-going ladies and embroidered tablecloths. A promise between friends was worth more than any signed note. Reporting Yiya wasn't just losing your money. It was admitting to your husband, your children, and the whole neighborhood that your best friend had conned you. Shame was Yiya's first insurance policy. Cyanide would be the second. The problem with every pyramid is mathematical. The day comes when the claims outgrow the income. By late 1978, several creditors were asking Yiya for their money back, insistently, with threats of scandal, of telling the husbands, of going to the police. Any common swindler would have done one of two things: disappear or negotiate. Yiya found a third way. If the creditor died, the debt died with her. And elderly ladies, as everyone knows, do die. Nobody asked too many questions. What followed was a summer in which having tea in Montserrat became an extreme sport. February 11th, 1979. Nilda Adelina Gamba, Yiya's neighbor and close friend, dies at home overnight. She was fine, and suddenly sickness, agony, death. The doctors sign off on natural causes. An older lady, a failing heart, the usual. Nobody mentions a fact that would later become central. Nilda had lent Yiya a substantial sum, and she was demanding it back. 12 days later, on February 22nd, neighbors in a nearby building called the police. An unbearable smell is coming from one apartment. Inside, they find Lilia Elida Formisano de Ayala, chicha to the whole neighborhood, dead, sitting in front of the television, still on the side table, fish leftovers, fine pastries, and a cup of tea. Chicha had been dead in front of that screen for days, and nobody had missed her. Another natural death, they say, another of Yiya's creditors. Nobody says. And on March 24th, the third one falls. Carmen Zulema del Giorgio de Venturini, Mema, who wasn't just any friend, she was Yiya's cousin. The initial version speaks of cardiac arrest, of a fall on the stairs. Mema had also entrusted money to her cousin. Mema was also demanding it back. 3 women from the same circle, dead in 6 weeks. All 3 had had tea shortly before dying. All 3 had the same debtor in common. And all 3 deaths passed at the time as perfectly normal. Stop on that for a second, because it's the criminal heart of this case. Yiya had found the perfect murder weapon for her ecosystem. Not a knife, not a gun, a poison served inside the most innocent, most feminine ritual of Buenos Aires culture. Tea and pastries among friends. Who orders an autopsy for an elderly lady who fell ill after her afternoon tea? Who suspects the elegant friend who accompanied her so lovingly in her final days and wept at all 3 wakes? The forensic experts will later give the matter its chemical name, cyanide. And the weapon deserves a pause, because it was chosen with an accountant's logic. Cyanide kills in minutes. It blocks the cell's ability to use oxygen, and the body collapses as if the heart has simply given up. To a doctor arriving to certify the death of a woman in her 60s, the picture is indistinguishable from a heart attack or a stroke. It leaves no wounds, no crime scene, no suspicion, unless someone specifically requests a toxicology screen. Something nobody requested in 1979 for the natural death of a retired lady. Poison is, historically, the weapon of those who kill from inside the circle of trust. You don't need strength, you need access. And access was exactly what Yiya had. Those doors opened for her with a kiss on the cheek. The perfect crime doesn't exist. But Yiya had found something better: the crime nobody wants to investigate. One more detail the chronicles repeat, and it paints the whole character. Yiya attended her victims' wakes. She cried with the families, comforted the mourners, brought flowers, the same hand that had stirred the tea. When investigators later reconstructed those scenes, more than one relative recalled her presence with a shudder. And that memory of the devoted friend at the funeral she herself had manufactured is what turns this case from a swindle with deaths into a textbook portrait of psychopathy, until somebody put 2 and 2 together, or rather 1 plus 1 plus 1. The chain was broken by the victims' families, in particular the circle around Mima, the cousin. Because one sudden death is bad luck, 2 in the same circle is coincidence, but 3 ladies from the same group of friends in 6 weeks, all right after afternoon tea, and all creditors of the same woman, that's a pattern. The bereaved started talking to each other and discovered the common thread: the money and the name, Yiya. The courts ordered what nobody had requested in time: exhumation of the bodies. The toxicology reports found traces of alkaline cyanide in all 3 women. There had been no 3 natural deaths in Montserrat. There had been 3 murders, served on a tray, literally. On April 27, 1979, police rang the doorbell of the 6th floor on Mexico Street and led María de las Mercedes Bernardina Boya de Murano away in handcuffs, in front of her husband Antonio. She was 48. Within hours, the press discovered the case had everything that sells: poison, money, middle-class ladies, living room secrets. The headlines christened her forever: the poisoner of Montserrat. The raid and the investigation surfaced the scaffolding of the scam: the promissory notes, the debts, the homemade accounting of a collapsing pyramid. The motive was so banal it was offensive. Yiya didn't kill out of hatred or jealousy or madness. She killed to avoid pain. 3 lives in exchange for debts that, seen from a distance, weren't even fortunes. The case's investigators, however, ran into a problem that would shape the entire file. There were no witnesses to the poisoning itself, no traces of the poison in Yiya's apartment, no confession. The whole case was a building made of inference. The documented deaths, Yiya's presence at the final teas, the cyanide in the 3 bodies, the pattern solid for common sense, fragile for a demanding court. Remember that fragility is the crack everything that follows will escape through. Argentina now expected an exemplary trial. What it got instead was a masterclass in something else: how to litigate, appeal, and walk. Yiya Murano's court file is a roller coaster that's still hard to explain today, and I'll ask you to take this chapter with the fine print in view, because even serious sources contradict each other on the dates. Act 1. Against all odds, the trial court acquits her. The evidence was circumstantial. Nobody saw her serve the poison, the defense was skillful, and Yiya walked back onto the street while the country rubbed its eyes. The poisoner of Montserrat free, waving at the cameras. Act 2. The prosecution appealed, and on June 28, 1985, the third chamber of the criminal court overturned the ruling and sentenced her to life imprisonment for triple homicide, life. The word sounded final. Yiya Murano would die in prison. Act 3. No. In 1994, Argentina passed the law known as dos por uno, 2 for 1, to decompress prisons full of inmates without final sentences, It ruled that every day of pretrial detention beyond 2 years counted double. Yiya, whose case had spent years bouncing between courts, was the perfect beneficiary of that arithmetic. Between that computation, procedural benefits, and her lawyer's skill, the life sentence deflated like a punctured balloon. In 1995, with roughly a decade and a half of effective confinement behind her, Yiya Murano walked out the front gate, legally free, life on paper, 16 years in practice for 3 premeditated murders. During her years inside, moreover, Yiya was never an ordinary inmate. She was the prison's celebrity. She gave interviews from behind bars, offered opinions, feuded with journalists, cultivated the character. Prison, which for anyone else is a parenthesis of invisibility, was for her a dressing room. When she came out, she didn't have to build a fame. It was ready, dressed, and waiting for her. And here, something must be said with total clarity, because this channel reports but also takes a stand. All of it was legal. No escape, no proven bribe, no clerical error. The system worked exactly as designed, and that is precisely the scandal. A law meant to decompress prisons ended up gifting decades of free life to a serial poisoner. The 3 victims never got a second instance. Any normal story would end here. Killer-free, country outraged, curtain. But this case is Argentine. And in Argentina, what came next may be the most unbelievable part of all. Yiya Murano walked out of prison and discovered she was famous. And instead of hiding as anyone with 3 homicides on their back would, she did the opposite. She climbed onto the stage. 90s Argentine television fought over her. Gossip shows, interview programs, panels, and the big scene, the one that opened this episode, MIRTHA Legrand's Table, the most institutional program in the country, with Yiya as the star guest serving pastries. The killer convicted of poisoning afternoon teas, offering afternoon tea to the country's supreme TV diva, with the entire studio celebrating the bit. Ratings exploded. Nobody seemed to mind that the joke was being told over 3 graves. In every appearance, Yiya recited her script with an actress's discipline. She was innocent. It had all been a judicial frame-up. She was the real victim. She laughed, flirted with the cameras, let herself be adored, and it worked. Part of the public ended up treating her as a quaint character, the cyanide granny, almost endearing. Morbid curiosity paid, and television collected, and the phenomenon had its economics. Infamy had become an asset. Shows fought for the exclusive, magazines paid for the photo, and every anniversary of the case recycled the character for a new generation. Yiya understood, long before the word existed, the logic of viral content. It doesn't matter whether they love you or hate you. What matters is that they can't look away, in a country still debating whether it was right to interview a convicted killer. She was already charging for the chair. The most painful dissenting voice came from her own blood. Her son, Martín Murano, broke the silence to describe his mother without anesthesia. A mythomaniac, a manipulator, a woman capable of lying as naturally as she breathed. He wrote a book about life beside that mother. Years later, when they made the series about Yiya, Martín set a single condition, that they not touch his father, or Ignacia, the woman who actually raised him. An entire childhood fits inside that clause. Think about it. Her son described her as a manipulative killer. The court had sentenced her to life, and television handed her the microphone and the spotlights. 3 truths running in parallel, and only one of them had ratings. Yiya's final years faded far from the cameras that had loved her so much. Elderly, her health failing, she ended up in a Buenos Aires nursing home. An ending of soft irony for someone who had turned other people's old age into an alibi. The woman who killed elderly ladies of natural causes became herself an elderly lady waiting for her own. She died on April 26, 2014 at 83, without confessing. Down to her last interview, she maintained her innocence with the same smile with which she had offered pastries all her life. She took to the grave the only complete version of what happened in that summer of 1979, if she ever cared to remember it. And then, as always happens with great media monsters, came the streaming resurrection. In November 2025, the Flow platform premiered Yiya, the series about her life, with Julieta Zilberberg and Cristina Vanegas playing her at different ages, plus a documentary special. The Argentine press filled up with her name again, the algorithms with her face, and the searches with the same eternal question: how real is the story? You now have the answer. And along the way, you have the other half of the story, the half that rarely makes the headlines, the names of Nilda Adelina Gamba, of Lilia Chicha Formisano, of Carmen Mima del Giorgio. 3 women who trusted a friend. Hold on to those names, because in the final chapter, we're going to talk about why nobody remembers them. On this channel, we say it plainly. Yiya Murano was a serial killer. That she killed with tea instead of a knife doesn't make her less monstrous. It makes her colder. She chose her victims among the people who trusted her most, killed them to avoid paying them back, and wept for them at their wakes. There is no quaint character in there. There is a predator with good manners. But the great discomfort of this case isn't Yiya, is the mirror. The court sentenced her to life and released her in 16 years through pure procedural engineering. Television rewarded her with fame, armchairs, and applause. The same country that was scandalized by the crime kept feeding the character, and collective memory did the rest. Today, anyone can name the poisoner of Montserrat, and almost no one can name Nilda, Chicha, or Mema. The killer got a series with 2 A-list actresses. The victims don't have so much as a plaque. That's the pattern that repeats across every case on this channel, from Mexico to Argentina. We turn the monsters into brands and their victims into footnotes, and every time ratings reward a smiling killer, we're teaching the next one that fame is part of the loot. There's one final layer this case leaves behind, and is uncomfortable for anyone who consumes or makes true crime, ourselves included. The line between telling a crime and monetizing a criminal is real, and Yiya crossed it arm in arm with an entire media system that has heirs on every platform today. The difference lies in the focus. Who occupies the center of the story? If the center is the killer and their cleverness, we're doing publicity. If the center is the facts, the system that failed, and the people who lost their lives, we're doing memory. This channel chose the second, and this case is the best explanation of why. So this episode closes the opposite way from the series, without Yiya, Nilda Adelina Gamba, Lilia Elida Formisano, Carmen Zulema del Giorgio, 3 friends who put up the money, the trust, and the afternoon tea. Let their names remain, at least in one episode. If this case moves something in you, subscribe and share it. Every case that gets told is a case that doesn't get forgotten. In the description, You'll find the full case file of this case, free to download, and tell me in the comments. Which case should we investigate next? See you in the next file. Uncut.